The world's greatest leaders have always been surrounded by mysteries. Historical figures like Stalin and Hitler were the subject of rumors about using body doubles to protect themselves from attacks and conspiracies. However, few modern leaders have generated as much speculation as Vladimir Putin. In recent years, videos and photos of his public appearances have been analyzed more closely, raising questions about subtle changes in his facial features and behavior. Are these just the natural effects of time, cosmetic procedures, or something much more intriguing? Dissident Russian journalists and Ukrainian authorities claim that Putin may not be who he appears to be anymore. Some suggest he is using body doubles to avoid threats or cover up possible health issues. Others go so far as to say that the real Putin might be dead and that someone has taken his place to maintain the stability of the Russian government. But how real are these allegations? Could one of the most closely watched men in the world be replaced without anyone noticing? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in getting YouTube to recommend the videos to more people and allowing me to continue bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get into the video. Have you ever noticed how some political figures seem to change subtly over time? Some changes are natural, such as aging and plastic surgeries. But what if I told you that, in Vladimir Putin's case, there are theories that go far beyond that? The idea that he might be dead and that a body double has taken his place may seem absurd at first glance, but some pieces of evidence raise questions that cannot be ignored. It all started when experts and dissident journalists began noticing strange details. Comparative images showed subtle but significant changes in the shape of the Russian president's face, chin, and even the position of his ears. Of course, this could be attributed to cosmetic surgeries or even the effect of different cameras. But then, why do some facial recognition analyses indicate discrepancies beyond what would be expected? And it doesn't stop there. Putin has a characteristic way of walking, always with one arm more rigid, a trait associated with the training he received in the KGB. But in some recent appearances, that detail was missing. Now think with me. Could it be just a simple change in posture, or is it evidence that we are not always seeing the same person? His behavior also raises suspicions. For years, Putin was known for his firm posture and authoritarian tone of voice. But in some recent moments, he seems different. More hesitant, less aggressive, almost as if he were uncomfortable in his own skin. It could simply be the exhaustion from years in power or the weight of the war. But what if it's something more? What if the person appearing on camera today is not the same as years ago? And speaking of voice, another strange detail emerges. Some audio analyses suggest variations in his tone in different speeches. Sometimes his voice sounds raspier, at other times it's more controlled and articulate. Of course, this could be explained by fatigue or even microphone adjustments. But what if there's another explanation? Now, a truly intriguing detail, the COVID-19 pandemic. During that time, Putin was seen avoiding physical contact with anyone, holding meetings at a great distance, like at the famous giant table that became a meme on the internet. But suddenly, he started appearing much closer to allies and authorities. What changed so abruptly? Did he simply lose his fear of the virus, or does this new version of Putin not worry about it anymore? The Kremlin, as expected, denies all these allegations. Putin himself said in 2020 that he had been advised to use body doubles for security, but refused. But if that's true, how do we explain the changes that continue to be pointed out? Moreover, if he ever truly needed a replacement, would admitting it even be an option? Now think about this. If Putin were really dead or incapacitated, who would be in charge? The Russian government is notoriously secretive, and the country's stability depends on Putin's image as an unshakable leader. In a scenario where information is tightly controlled, to what extent could this theory really be dismissed? It's worth remembering that hiding information about Russian leaders' health is nothing new. During the Soviet Union, figures like Brezhnev, Andropov, and Chernenko ruled while gravely ill, and their true conditions were only revealed long after. This shows that concealing the truth about a head of state has happened before. Now comes the most important question: how long could a secret of this magnitude be kept? The world today is much more technologically advanced and interconnected than during the Cold War. If Putin had really been replaced by a body double, would it be possible to hide it for so long without any concrete information leaking? In the end, the doubts remain. Some can be explained by logical factors, while others cannot. But one thing is certain: Putin remains one of the greatest mysteries in world politics. Now I ask you, is the man we see today really who they say he is? If there's one thing that stands out in this theory, it's the physical changes in Vladimir Putin over the years. And I'm not just talking about an aging face or a different haircut. What some experts have noticed goes beyond the ordinary. Comparisons between different appearances of the Russian president show that certain details of his face are no longer the same. But is this just an effect of time, or a sign that we are dealing with more than one Putin? Let's start with the shape of the chin. If you look at photos of Putin from a few years ago and compare them to more recent images, you'll notice a subtle but intriguing difference. In some instances, he appears to have a narrower, more defined chin, while in others, the shape is rounder and wider. Now, of course, this could be an effect of weight loss or gain. But what if I told you that these changes occur irregularly, without a continuous pattern? And it doesn't stop there. Another detail that caught the attention of experts is the position of his ears. In certain videos and photos, they appear closer to the skull, while in others, they seem further apart. The height of his ears in relation to his nose also shows subtle variations. At first glance, this might seem insignificant, but the position of the ears is one of the hardest physical traits to alter surgically. Could it be a perception error caused by camera angles, or is there something more happening here? Now think with me. Could plastic surgeries explain some of these changes? Yes, but only up to a point. Putin himself has been the subject of rumors suggesting he underwent facial fillers and other cosmetic procedures, especially because, in some images, his face looks more swollen and rigid, as if under the effect of Botox. But if that were the only reason, wouldn't these differences be consistent over time? So why do they appear and disappear inconsistently? Then we come to another curious detail: skin texture. Some experts claim that in certain appearances, Putin's skin looks more wrinkled and marked, while in others, his face seems strangely smooth and youthful. Could all this be due to lighting effects and image quality? Perhaps. But isn't it odd that these differences are so noticeable at different moments? Now, here's something even more intriguing. A study conducted by a group of Ukrainian researchers suggested that Putin's height may not always be the same. On some occasions, he appears slightly shorter than expected when compared to people around him. In others, the proportions seem different. Of course, factors like posture and footwear type can affect this, but if we are dealing with body doubles, slight height differences would be a difficult issue to hide, don't you think? And if all this weren't enough, there's another curious detail: his hands. In some images, Putin's fingers appear thinner, while in others, they look thicker and more swollen. This could be an effect of fluid retention or circulatory issues, but it raises a question. If there are so many subtle differences spread across his body, to what extent can we ignore them? Now, I want you to think about this. If Putin were really using body doubles, the Kremlin would never admit it. The Russian government has always maintained strict control over the image of its leaders. In the Soviet Union, it was common to manipulate official photographs to remove political figures who had fallen from favor. If a government has that level of control over what the public sees, would it really be so difficult to hide the use of a double? If this theory is real, who would be behind the operation? Would Putin's body doubles be agents trained by the Kremlin itself? Or could they be external figures, surgically altered to resemble him? Some unverified sources claim that doubles have been used in high-risk events to protect the real Putin from potential attacks. But what if, at some point, one of these doubles took on an even greater role? Of course, there's always the possibility that all of this is just speculation. Facial alterations can be caused by countless factors, from camera angles to temporary swelling. But it's interesting to note that these differences are repeatedly pointed out. If they were merely optical illusions, why do so many people continue noticing these inconsistencies? In the end, the question remains, are we really seeing the same man in all of Putin's appearances? Or are there more faces hidden behind the mask of power? Sometimes the body speaks louder than words. And in the case of Vladimir Putin, some people have started noticing that it's not just his face that seems different, but also the way he moves, gestures, and even reacts to certain situations. If a body double were really replacing the real Putin, one of the biggest challenges would be perfectly imitating his behavior. But did the impersonators manage to fool everyone? Let's start with a curious detail: Putin's walk. Since taking power, he has always had a peculiar way of walking, with one arm held more rigidly at his side. According to experts, this trait is a result of his KGB training, where agents were taught to keep one arm close to their weapon holster for a quick draw in case of danger. However, in some recent appearances, this characteristic has simply vanished. The Putin we see today seems to walk more freely, without that stiffness in his right arm. Now tell me, after decades of habit, would he simply change his way of walking? And there's more. Putin has always been a man of restrained, calculated gestures, never exaggerating. But in some recent instances, he has started gesturing more than usual. In older speeches, he was cold, direct, and minimal in his movements. Now, in certain videos, he appears to move his hands in a different, almost theatrical way. Are these just natural changes over time, or something deeper? Another thing that doesn't go unnoticed is eye contact. Putin always had that fixed, intimidating gaze, characteristic of a leader used to being in control. But something has changed. In some recent meetings, he seems to avoid direct eye contact, shifts his gaze, and blinks more frequently than usual. A small detail, but one that body language experts point to as a possible sign of discomfort. If he is the same man, why does he now behave so differently? And then there's something even stranger. Putin has always been known for his firm and measured speech. Yet, in some appearances, his intonation sounds slightly different. Sometimes his tone is lighter, less authoritative. Of course, age can influence this, but what if the explanation is something else? What if, in some of these events, the voice we are hearing is not exactly the Putin we know? Then comes a detail that many ignore, his body posture. The Putin of the past always had a strong physical presence, with squared shoulders and an imposing stance. But recently, he has been seen with a more relaxed posture, at times even slightly hunched. Could this be a sign of fatigue or aging? Sure. But what if we are seeing different people, each trying to imitate the Russian leader with varying degrees of success? His behavior in social interactions also raises doubts. Putin has always been a cold, calculating political strategist, rarely showing strong emotions in public. Yet lately, he has been seen laughing more spontaneously, reacting more exaggeratedly to jokes or trivial situations. A natural behavioral change, or another sign that we are not always seeing the same person. And now comes a detail that almost no one noticed. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Putin spent months avoiding any physical contact, holding meetings at a significant distance. Then suddenly, he appears shaking hands and sitting next to allies without hesitation. What changed so drastically? Did he simply overcome his fear of contamination? Or are we seeing someone who never had that concern to begin with? Meetings with foreign leaders also present curious moments. In some meetings, Putin appears seated in a relaxed manner, with looser facial expressions. In others, he returns to his almost robotic rigidity. Behavioral analysis experts suggest that these fluctuations could be a sign that different people are assuming the role at different times. After all, an actor can train to imitate someone, but small slips will always reveal themselves. And here's a question few stop to consider. If Putin really had body doubles, how would they be trained? Would they spend years studying every detail of his body language? Would they receive psychological training to replicate his personality? Or is this theory simply a reflection of humanity's fascination with mysteries and conspiracies? The Kremlin, as expected, would never admit that something like this is happening. For the Russian government, Putin is a strong, unwavering leader, always the same. But with so many subtle changes in behavior, can we really say that with certainty? Now think carefully. Are we really watching the same Putin as always, or someone trying to play the role as best as possible? The idea that great leaders use body doubles for protection is nothing new. Dictators, heads of state, and even public figures throughout history have been accused of employing lookalikes to mislead enemies or avoid assassination attempts. But what if I told you that Putin might be one of the greatest modern examples of this practice? Has the man who appears on Russian television always been the same? Let's go back in time. During World War II, rumors suggested that Stalin had at least one body double to fool potential assassins. Saddam Hussein, the former Iraqi dictator, was famous for allegedly using lookalikes in public appearances, so much so that after his capture, dental exams were conducted to confirm it was really him. And if Russia, with its tradition of absolute secrecy, is doing the same with Putin? Now here's the interesting part. In 2020, Putin himself admitted that in the early 2000s, his advisors suggested using body doubles for security reasons. He said he rejected the idea, but if the need arose later, would he really have stuck to that decision? After all, a leader like Putin, surrounded by external and internal enemies, wouldn't afford to be predictable. And we're not just talking about random rumors. Several experts claim that some of Putin's appearances seem inconsistent. At some events, he appears older, while in others, he looks suddenly rejuvenated. And here's the question: is it just a matter of lighting and makeup, or is there a much more complex explanation happening behind the scenes at the Kremlin? Now, imagine the difficulty of training someone to perfectly imitate a leader like Putin. It's not enough to just look like him. The double would need to copy his voice, mannerisms, even his way of responding to unexpected questions. Not to mention mastering the Russian language and political rhetoric. Could a perfect copy really be created? But what if it weren't just one double? What if there were several? Some analysts believe that at least 3 versions of Putin are used in different contexts. One for public speeches, another for private meetings, and a third for international visits. Does this make sense? It may sound absurd, but if we think about it, this would be an extremely effective strategy to confuse not only the public, but also foreign intelligence agencies. And there's something else strange. Some people have noticed that in certain events, Putin's body language seems more relaxed, more casual. In others, he appears visibly rigid and formal. Normal mood swings? Maybe. But some claim that these details are clear signs that different people are playing the same role. Now tell me, if this theory is real, who is controlling it? Who decides when a double appears in place of the real Putin? Russian intelligence? The top officials of the Kremlin? Or could it be that even the president's closest allies are unaware of the true extent of this operation? And here comes the most intriguing question of all. If one of these doubles were to slip up in some detail, how would it be corrected before the world noticed? Are the videos edited? Are there strict rules in place to prevent any mistakes from reaching the public? The Kremlin, as always, remains silent on these allegations. For the Russian government, all of this is nothing more than opposition fantasies and Western media speculation. But with so many inconsistencies, can we simply ignore the signs? In the end, one thing is certain. Russia has always been an expert in controlling narratives and manipulating information. But if the truth about Putin's body doubles ever comes to light, will the world be ready to handle such a revelation? Every government has its secrets, but few are as closed off as the Kremlin. The decisions that shape Russia don't happen in front of cameras. They take place behind the scenes, where only a select group has access to the real game of power. When doubts arise about who is truly in command, one inevitable question emerges. Who is making the decisions in the world's most unpredictable country? Putin's image has always represented strength and stability for Russia. However, recent inconsistencies in his appearance and behavior raise even deeper questions. If a body double is occupying his place, does decision-making still rest with the real Putin, or is Russia's fate in the hands of another figure operating from the shadows? Russia's political structure does not function like a traditional democracy. The Kremlin operates through a complex network of influence, composed of military leaders, billionaire oligarchs, and Russian intelligence officials. This circle of power does not allow for leadership vacuums. If Putin were incapacitated or no longer in control, someone would have to fill that space without raising suspicions. The most frequently mentioned name in these speculations is Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of Russia's Security Council and one of Putin's closest allies. A former director of the FSB, the successor agency to the KGB, Patrushev represents the hardest-line faction of the Russian government. His influence behind the scenes has always been evident, and many believe he has all the capabilities to run Russia without ever needing to step into the spotlight. Beyond Patrushev, other key government figures also hold enough power to keep the system running. Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, commands the armed forces and has remained loyal to the Kremlin for years. Dmitry Medvedev, former president and current deputy chairman of the Security Council, could take on a more active role in a scenario where the true leadership needed to be concealed. Russian oligarchs, billionaires who amassed wealth under Putin's rule, also have a direct interest in maintaining the status quo. For this elite, a stable Kremlin means the preservation of their financial empires. Any sudden shift in power could put their billion-dollar businesses at risk, businesses that depend on Russia's influence in the global energy and arms markets. The FSB, the direct successor to the KGB, represents another crucial pillar in this structure. Russia's intelligence agency not only protects the Kremlin's interests, but also controls the country's internal narrative. If compromising information were to emerge, the government's censorship and propaganda machine would ensure that it disappears before causing any real damage. The use of a body double in official events wouldn't just be a matter of security. It would be a political strategy to ensure that Putin's image remains intact. Despite rumors, the government maintains a consistent narrative. Putin is in charge, and Russia remains strong under his leadership. But who is truly holding the reins behind the scenes? The war in Ukraine has made this issue even more sensitive. With heavy international sanctions and a prolonged conflict, Russia needs to project strength to both its allies and adversaries. A leadership crisis within the Kremlin would weaken the country's position on the global stage. Maintaining Putin's image ensures that nothing appears to change, at least in the eyes of the public. Nothing in the Russian government happens by chance. Any transition of power must be carefully orchestrated to prevent internal destabilization. If Putin is no longer in control, decisions are still being made by the same group that has governed Russia for decades. The only difference would be the presence of a familiar face to prevent chaos. History has already shown that leaders can be replaced without the public immediately noticing. In the past, the Soviet Union concealed the true condition of its rulers until the last moment. The tradition of hiding the truth about the country's leadership remains alive today. The real question is not just about who appears on Russian television, but who is actually holding the reins of power. As long as Putin's image continues to be broadcast to the world, the true commanders of the Kremlin operate in the shadows, far from cameras and international scrutiny. The face may be the same, but the hands that govern Russia may have changed long ago. Nothing stays hidden forever. Political secrets can endure for years, but at some point, the truth finds a way to surface. If it were ever proven that Putin had been replaced by a body double, the impact would be devastating, not just for Russia, but for the entire world. The first immediate effect would be the collapse of trust in the Russian government. The Kremlin's stability relies on Putin's image as an absolute leader. Any confirmation that an impostor had been occupying his place would shake Russia's political structure to its core. The Russian public, even accustomed to censorship, would demand answers. And international allies would have to reassess their relationships with Moscow. Russia's elite, composed of billionaires and military leaders, would enter a fierce power struggle. For years, Putin has been the central figure holding this system together. Without him, the leadership vacuum could trigger internal conflicts among different factions of the government. Generals, oligarchs, and intelligence officials would move quickly to secure their positions in the new order. Russia's enemies wouldn't hesitate to take advantage. Countries that already view Moscow as a threat could use this revelation as a political weapon. The West would ramp up its pressure on Russia, questioning every decision made under the rule of the supposed double. At the UN, Russian allies such as China and Iran might reconsider their stance, fearing that internal instability could weaken their most significant geopolitical partner. The impact would also be felt in the realm of information warfare. For years, the Russian propaganda machine has built Putin's image as an unshakable leader. The discovery of a body double would shatter that narrative, weakening Russia's influence both domestically and abroad. Opposition groups within Russia would use this revelation to mobilize protests, while international media would expose every detail of the deception. Western intelligence agencies almost certainly already have information on this possibility. If they ever choose to reveal it, they would do so with surgical precision, ensuring that the revelation inflicts maximum damage on the Kremlin. This could happen through leaks, comparative images, or even testimonies from former members of the Russian government. Even within the Russian military, such a revelation could cause divisions. Generals loyal to the real Putin would not accept an impostor in power. This could open the door to coup attempts within the armed forces, further destabilizing a country already under pressure from external conflicts and economic sanctions. If this truth were to be uncovered from within, the Kremlin's reaction would be swift and ruthless. Dissidents attempting to expose this information would be silenced before they could reach the public. Censorship would intensify, and any mention of the topic would disappear from the Russian internet. The government would do everything possible to discredit any evidence, branding it as Western disinformation. But an inevitable question remains: How long can a lie be sustained? If this deception were to crumble one day, what would remain of the government that upheld this illusion? The world might be closer to a historic revelation than it realizes. Power always finds ways to preserve itself. Governments fall, leaders disappear, but the structures that control the world continue operating, often far from public view. The story of Putin's alleged death and the use of body doubles may seem like fiction to some, but the evidence suggests something far greater than a mere conspiracy theory. When physical details don't match, gestures change, and behaviors shift, doubt takes hold. And when a government does everything in its power to suppress questions, those questions become even more dangerous. The truth may be right in front of us, hidden within rehearsed speeches, calculated appearances, and a system that cannot afford to collapse. But no lie lasts forever. One mistake, one slip, one moment of carelessness could be enough to bring everything crashing down. And when that happens, the world may realize that it never truly knew who was in control of Russia. This story is just one piece, and one day perhaps you'll see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share, because more voices mean more discoveries.